Welcome to episode 3 of Dishing with the Pathways DTMs. My name is David Lintz, and I'm pleased to be your host for an interview with another Toastmaster in our district who has earned the Distinguished Toastmaster designation under the Pathways program. Many of you know Trevor Crippen as our district director for the 2021-2022 Toastmasters year. But before he assumed that role, he had 4 consecutive years of district leadership experience, starting out as an area director, a role for which he was recognized as the area director of the year, followed by service as a division director, club growth director, and program quality director. Before that, he served the district as a CL-Con conference chair and as a humorous speech contest chair, actually in a contest in which I participated, and I can tell you, Trevor did an excellent job. His interest in helping new clubs get off to a good start is evidenced by his service multiple times as both a club sponsor and a club mentor. And last but not least, he has served as a club officer for what I'm guessing is more times than he can count. I guess that's right.
That's about right.
Okay, Trevor, welcome. Let's dive right into my questions. First, can you briefly tell me about what you did for your DTM project?
My DTM project for Pathways was built around something I had to do anyway, which was leading the club officer training as program quality director. Normally, that wouldn't be a project that you would have to build out on your own because you're provided all these materials from Toastmasters. But I had the pleasure of having to create training in a completely online format without having that material provided by Toastmasters yet. It was the very first time we did purely online. So my DTM project was built around building a training team and a curriculum that worked in an online format using only base materials that were built for completely in-person trainings.
So having experienced both online and in-person training, I have a little familiarity with it. And I suppose some of the differences are pretty obvious. You don't have people sitting in front of you. In some ways, I suppose it's easier. You don't need refreshments and so forth. But I'm guessing that there's a lot of less obvious differences that don't really occur to you until you start working on a project like this. Can you tell me about some of those?
Sure. One of the main benefits of being in person is you get these sort of natural interactions before and after a training, where you start talking to people from around the district and you start learning from other people just organically through conversations. And when you're in a virtual training environment, you don't get that at all. So you have to, on the one hand, manufacture opportunities like that through creating breakout sessions, which Toastmasters has done a really good job in when they created their training material finally for online to like integrate those throughout, and you're kind of familiar with them now. But it was something that wasn't obvious at the time, that was like, oh, you really just need to manufacture this and fit these things in, rather than trying to structure the agenda so strongly. What you're used to in person is actually pushing on the structure end because people are naturally pushing back and wanting to have conversations. Whereas in the online format, you actually have to push back on your own level of control because as the person talking and as a host in an online format, you almost have too much control over the session and you want to try to get more people involved and force that. So that was not obvious, but it was a big deal. And you realize more and more how important that stuff is as you started doing these trainings.
It's interesting. You think in a live environment, as you said, you can interact with other people. You can have these kind of side conversations that you learn things. And in Zoom, it's obviously the chat feature, which in some ways substitutes for that function, if not completely, but at least partially. And in some ways takes on an entirely different function that I think a lot of people who aren't comfortable raising their hand in a session all of a sudden are comfortable using Zoom and using the chat feature. And I think anyone who figures out how the two are used differently and figures out a way to exploit chat properly if you're doing it online is going to be making a real contribution. So I think for any of us who've done DTM projects, we have kind of a plan on what's going to happen and how we're going to do it. And then as the saying goes, man proposes and God disposes. Different things come up that aren't what you expected. Can you describe some of these unanticipated challenges that you wish you had been aware of when you started your project and how you addressed them?
Sure. Thanks for the question, David. I guess the biggest unanticipated challenge for me going into this relatively early in the pandemic and creating online format programs was just on the personal side of things. It's not so much the Toastmaster stuff, which I'm able to like sort of hyper fixate on and work on polishing my slideshows and thinking about the timing on the agenda. And there was little things that come up, but like the challenges that I'm in this in Toastmasters for, right? But the real challenges that you find trying to pull these things off were just your own physical and mental well-being, as it were. This is early in the pandemic where you kind of see have a sudden change in the way that you're operating within the world. You are not getting as much physical exercise. I mean, these in-person trainings are, you put my whole body into it. It's a real physical affair. I come home like physically exhausted after one of those. And it's online trainings, it was the opposite problem where I'm sitting in my chair now for 3 hours at a time, several times. We're doing more and more training offerings throughout. I'm not only sitting in my chair the entire training, but I'm also sitting in my chair, like focusing on doing these slideshows. And I think physically letting myself go to some extent. And I think it was really important that I got up and learned to kind of take care of myself better instead of, the physical stuff would come when you're in person, you're running around places, and it just didn't come in this online session. And that was a big challenge for me to overcome so I could keep up the same energy level.
Yeah, I think that's something that anybody who was working during the early days of COVID certainly can relate to. And anyone who had a job that required them in the past just to be on the phone, but now requires them to be on Zoom, certainly that resonates with them. And I suppose the challenge gets even larger if you're not delivering one-on-one, but are rather delivering to a large group that's really counting on you to do it right. So one of the reasons we do DTM projects is to try to hone our leadership skills. I'd be interested in hearing about how this project required you to use your leadership skills, at least from your perspective. And do you think it contributed to your preparation for the district director role?
Sure. So the way in which I was able to utilize leadership skills throughout was about bringing in people to participate in this training. As the program quality director, I did end up talking a lot at these trainings because you're sort of coordinating the show and you have like your own segment that you put in to cover some big important thing at the start. But all the individual officer sessions, which had to be broken out into smaller groups, you have to bring somebody in to do all of those sessions. And you have to make sure that they're prepared to do those sessions as well, because you don't just like launch people into this thing that is different than it's ever been and say, here, you just figure it out. So there was a lot of bringing people together and doing that sort of training and preparation and providing them with materials that would help them out and building up people's comfort level, just talking to people and saying, hey, I think that you are capable of doing this. Here's like some of the things that I've learned about how you can best set yourself up for success. But I really think that you can be successful as long as you just come in with some base materials and some guidelines about how this can be done well. And then you can go and execute it.
I think
And
that, sorry,
oh, I was going to continue on to the second question as well, but you want to interject?
no, I was just going to say on this part, the way you described it just sounds so much like the way Toastmasters describes to us about how effective leadership works. Instead of thinking it as a top-down command structure, the goal of leadership is how do I get the best of the people I'm working with? And what I liked about the description you gave is very little was about dictating to people what they had to do, but rather giving them a chance to shine.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the pleasures of being in Toastmasters, actually, is seeing the ways in which other people do things and how, and learning from that too. You know, if I watch somebody else do something, maybe it's not exactly the way that I would do it. And then sometimes, like, inside, I'd be like a little nervous when it was going differently than how I do it. But then it would turn out really well. Like, they get to where they envision to get to. I'm like, oh wow, that was a really good idea. That that I can incorporate that as a learning lesson for myself. So yeah, for every time where something didn't quite work out and was a learning lesson for the other person, then there was just as many times, if not more, where I was learning every single time I saw somebody else that I delegated one of these training opportunities to do. So it was wonderful. That was one of my favorite parts of the experience, was working with different people who came in to run the training sessions.
So I still would like to hear the answer to the second part of the question about specifically how it contributed to preparing for the district director role.
Right, right. So there's all sorts of things about this that contributed to how I was able to serve in the district director role. And a big part of it was just building up that comfort level with using online meetings and running that sort of thing, where I basically coordinated all these trainings early on, to the point where, yeah, running a Zoom session, a complicated Zoom session like a TLI or a conference, was in my belt, to the point where, you know, running a fall business meeting as district director, as intimidating as that is, like, it didn't seem like as big of a deal anymore. And so I was quite comfortable in that environment as a result. And then the other ways in which it contributed was just, you know, seeing the results of getting people involved and encouraging me to get people involved as a district director, because that's really your entire job as district director at that point. You're no longer the person doing things besides the, you know, those district business level business meeting type things. Instead, all the other things you think of the district as doing, you're delegating those responsibilities and trying to recruit people into those roles, and trying to you know, clean up fires as they arise, fill in gaps, because there's always gaps. There's open area director roles and things like that. So yeah, just having this initial project where you can do that on a training level scale really helped put me in a comfortable position to lead at the district level.
So really a wonderful secret to success. I don't know if we would voluntarily choose to put people through this experience to make it happen. But I suppose, like a lot of things in life, those things that don't break you make you stronger.
Yeah, I mean, it's Toastmasters, so it's still low stakes, even at the highest levels. It's still an opportunity to practice. It's still not the end of the world if you make mistakes. Like, I've made plenty of mistakes, uh, and you can just learn from that process. And then, you know, there's a new set of leaders every year, so they can do things in their own way, clean up any messes you left. The cycle goes on with opportunities to learn and try to have fun in these roles. So I don't want to say that I didn't enjoy doing any of these roles, even when they were difficult.
I'm going to go on to a different topic. One of the requirements of the DTM project is to do a 360 survey to get feedback from people at your peer level or working for you or above you in the food chain. And some people like it, some people don't. I know that you adopted a kind of unconventional approach to approaching it, or doing, I guess, something that was 360 adjacent, I'll call it. Can you tell me about it, why you adopted it, and how it worked out?
Sure. One of my paths that I ended up doing before the DTM project was innovative planning. And as you may or may not know, the level 5 required project in innovative planning is a high performance leadership project. So I don't even remember what I did that on, that's fine, honestly. But that does have the 360 evaluation in it as part of it. So I'd already gone through one of these Pathways 360 evaluations before I got to the DTM project. And my experience with that is you get this PDF provided by Toastmasters that's 4 pages long, and you send it out to people. And it's a big ask to have somebody sit there and fill out like 4 dense pages of bubbles. You don't really know what to say in every case. Some of it's doesn't seem applicable. Some of it you're like, oh, well, I'm not really in a. And I didn't have a great success rate in getting people to return those to me. And so, as valuable as maybe one of those could be to me, if somebody did fill it out, I thought, yeah, well, there's no point if nobody does fill it out. So when I came around to the DTM project, I didn't want to use those PDFs because I did not have success in getting them returned to me. And instead, I chose to kind of create some Google Forms where I sort of tailored the questions a little bit more. If I recall correctly, I was trying to look and find the thing that I had created before this meeting, and of course I can't find it. It's lost to the ages. But I do remember that I reduced the amount of questions that I was asking and tried to make it an easy ask for someone to fill it out and get some feedback back to me by honing in on the stuff that I thought was most useful and most applicable in the circumstance that I was using it in, instead of asking for this 4-page long document that I knew I would not get back.
So a couple of things. One, to hear that a district director felt the freedom to move to something that would achieve the purpose of the 360, but in a more effective way, I think should give the rest of us all the right to feel a little bit of license to try to do something similar. I've done 360s, I think, on 3 separate occasions in Toastmasters, and I share your frustration, although I didn't share your creativity to actually think of something else to do instead. But I think on my next one, I'm going to try to do the same thing, to come up with short forms and maybe actually tailor it, not so much to the particular project, but also to the particular person that I'm asking the feedback from. There's certain people who can give it in some areas and not in others. And even if you have people who are willing to fill them out, and I think I was reasonably successful in getting that, a lot of it felt like literally a check the box exercise with a lot of not applicables and so forth. So the notion of spending a little time and maybe saying, what are the 5 questions that if this person answered would be really helpful for me, gives you less total pages to read, but a lot more value per page. So I like that idea, and I think it's something a lot of people should think about doing. Next requirement is a lessons learned session. And I'm curious about how you structure that and what you did or did not find useful about that session.
For the lessons learned session that I ended up doing was with the core people involved were myself and Anthony Alexander and Audrey Crippen, who were the respectively were the district director and club growth director. And we didn't bring in a lot of the people that had been in running the training sessions, who are the the individual volunteer team members, because they were committed to that 1 day session in particular, and then a little bit of individual follow-up afterwards, but not thousands of overall planning meetings. And I honestly, we didn't particularly structure it. We more talked through how things were going and what was successful, and kind of free form in that respect. And there was a focus on making sure that we were set up to do the next round of trainings well. So in the early part of the year, thinking about the winter and ways in which we could change and tweak the winter training, and then into the following summer, where there would be a new program quality director taking over, who ended up not being Audrey at the time, but Audrey was still very much involved in those training sessions in the following year as the TLA training dean, which allowed us to have some continuation of the lessons learned in that respect. So I think that there was a lot of value in it, from passing down the baton and setting up the district for future success, and setting up myself for continued success in building these sorts of events and trainings. Just have that bouncing back and forth. Maybe it would have been if I'd structured it more strongly, if there was a more distinct crew of different people involved in the high level planning than the Fab Four or trio, then I would have done it as a more structured event. But I think the informal setup made more sense in this circumstance.
So this feels like a similar approach to what you did with the 360, that it feels like you looked at the requirement, but then you asked the question, what is the way I can get the most value from what's intended by this? And is there a different way of getting it that's going to address what's supposed to be covered, but is going to address it in a way that I can get real value? And like most things in life, something custom designed is usually more effective than something off the rack. So it sounds like in both these cases, you did something that was actually able to create some actual value for yourself to understand how things could be done differently in the future, what the lessons were to learn. So again, I think that's a valuable lesson for all of us.
Right. I mean, I think that I've always been a little bit flexible when it comes to looking at projects in Toastmasters. I was with the old program as well. And as long as you are, comfortable that you're getting the intent out of this and you're learning from it, and you're working with your vice president of education of your club, who's the person that approves you being done with these, and saying, yeah, this is what I did. And they're like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. That's fine. I mean, this is the way that Toastmasters built the system. They didn't put in a high level approval on finishing projects for a reason. They wanted it to be decided within the groups, within the clubs. And as long as they're not totally abusing the system in some respect, I think that's how the system's supposed to be working, with some flexibility in it.
Now, I think like a lot of things in life, there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law. And at least in these cases, it's important to live within the spirit of the law. And I think you really explained very clearly 2 examples of where you were able to do this and actually come up with a better result. So before we conclude, just any closing thoughts that you have, words of advice for prospective DTMs?
Well, I would say, for one thing, be flexible, like we were just talking about. Find out how to make the journey of becoming a DTM the most effective for you, and so that you learn the most out of it and that you grow the most out of the experience, rather than being stressed out about dotting every I and crossing every T to a point where it's not necessary and it becomes a detraction from the learning experience. And then the other thing is, like, if you're somebody trying to figure out, what am I going to do for a DTM project? In my particular circumstance, there was something that came up that was like a big need that I could fulfill. And that's how I generally approach these big projects in Toastmasters. Is there's always going to be some need that requires a creative solution at the district level, at the club level, outside of your club, just out in the world. There are so many things that need a creative solution. So find something that either is immediate or you're passionate about and try to come up with a creative solution for the problem, for the need. You don't need to, look everywhere in the world for the perfect DTM project. Find that one question that needs to be answered, the problem that needs to be fixed, and start putting together a team.
I should say parenthetically to that, there are specific projects that the district has identified that there is an urgent need for, or fairly important need for. So they are collected and they are available on the front page of the District 31 website. If you click on the icon for the DTM project, the list right now is fairly short, and I'm sure there's other projects as well. And I'm sure there's people who are thinking of projects that would be a good idea for the district. And it's easy enough to figure out if it's an idea that makes sense or not, really by contacting any of the members of the Fab Four, and they'll either know or they will discuss it with their colleagues. And a very good way to get a project started, and particularly a project where you can get some support from the district to help you as well. So thank you, Trevor, for such an informative session, for sharing a key part of your Pathways DTM journey, and of course, for your impressive record of service to the district. And thanks to all of you who are viewing this for your interest in dishing with the Pathways DTMs. As Toastmasters, we all know how valuable candid and constructive feedback can be. If you have any feedback that you're willing to share with me, I look forward to receiving it. The best way to reach me is by email at the following address. Until the next session, be well and keep striving to achieve your goals.